All right, welcome back to Nebula Noises. My name is Will. It's nice to have you here. You might think it's a kind of a strange idea that I decided to do a podcast, YouTube channel, Instagram feed, whatever, about sound in space, because you're like, hey, Will, space doesn't make any sound. It's a crazy vacuum. Well, I mean, sound doesn't travel in space, but that doesn't mean that the things that comprise space don't make some kind of sound. For instance, I'm going to go ahead and kick this whole thing off with the sound of the sun. That we actually use sound in the sun to understand it. This is what the sun sounds like. This is from the NASA archives, by the way. This is their, what do they call it? The Solar and Heliospheric Observatory captured this through their electromagnetic telescopes, I believe. They're able to convert that electromagnetic signal into something that we can actually hear ourselves as sound. So, no, the sun doesn't actually produce this kind of a tone, but this is the kind of dynamic and kind of beat that the sun actually has to it, and we can use this information to understand all of the energetic flows that are happening inside of the sun, which, if you ask me, is pretty freaking cool. I believe what they've done in order to make this audible for the human is take the electromagnetic fluctuations that they're getting through their telescopes, through their observatories, and they speed it up, I'm reading here, 42,000 times faster than what the actual pulse is. So again, it's not exactly real, but we can use that flow and use that sound to understand it. Now, I think that's amazing. And if the sun, as an electromagnetic body, is putting out its own signal, then, well, what about you and me? You know, what do we have our own electromagnetic signal that we generate that people can pick up on? Because if so, that's amazing. I mean, what if you walked into a room and instead of my name is Bob, you walk in and you go, and everyone's like, oh, that's great. You're that guy, great. And all of the major planets actually have this kind of a signal to them. If you look up the sound of Earth, I'm just going to go into Google here and type it in. Ready? Sound of Earth. How Earth sounds from space. Check this out. It's almost like you can hear all of those it's almost like it's all there. Which I think is pretty incredible, honestly, that we can pick this kind of thing up. So, going back to my original point, you think that, or you might think that sound and space aren't exactly related, but they are. That sound is so much more important. I mean, what if you were an alien race and you're just kind of scanning the skies and you point to little, Earth and you're like, wait a minute. That doesn't sound like just a rock floating in space. It has fluctuation. It has life. It has this energy in it. What could that be? And then maybe that's how aliens end up finding Earth. I mean, how crazy would that be? That our signals that we've been putting out for, I don't know, about 100 years. One day they bask over another solar system, here in our galaxy or maybe even further away. I mean, okay, that would take billions of years to actually get out to another galaxy. Let's be real. But even Jupiter has its own thing. Let's do this again. Ready? Sound of Jupiter. This is from the NASA Voyager recording. Hang on now. Let's turn that up a little bit. I mean, how crazy is that, right? it almost has this like resonant bell-like quality to it. Like a, like a resonance or some kind. And it kind of makes me think of a philosophical exploration by Pythagoras, where he talks about this music of the spheres, but that's a huge misnomer because what he was talking about was the planets actually moving across the sky. And he thought that, the Earth was at the center of all of it, and that there were these, like, rhythmic sort of evolutions or revolutions that were happening with all these celestial bodies. There we go. I accidentally soloed a channel there. And unfortunately, it does get misquoted a lot that these resonant things are like the music of the spheres. No, he was talking about a mathematical approach to that resonance, that this repetitive motion that these bodies had. And really, what he was seeing is that they orbit. And he was one of the first people to sort of write this down with this kind of thought that they were sort of orbiting anything at all. Unfortunately, again, he was talking that he was thinking that they orbited Earth, not that they actually orbit the sun. So, smart guy, not quite that smart. We got into that a little bit later, but that will be another episode of Nebula Noises. But here's another question. Do nebulas make noise? Let's get into that. So this is the sound of Orion's nebula as detected by the ALMA radio telescope. It almost sounds like it's meditating, right? It sounds like... Well, it kind of sounds like you're in a spaceship, let's be real. But... you compare that to Earth. What we heard just a little bit ago of Earth's radio frequencies and stuff, and you kind of feel like there's that same kind of energy there. There's the same kind of living ether that's out there in space. And that we can pick that up through these radio telescopes, I think is pretty incredible. Now I'm going to fade that out just a little bit. It blows my mind. It really does. It blows my mind that we even have the ability to pick this kind of stuff up. And I suppose where I'm getting with all of this is that if we can find all of this electromagnetic flux happening everywhere and in everything in the universe, up to planets and nebula and stars, maybe even us, it gets me thinking about life. And, a subject for future episodes is this crazy idea that the universe even supports a living thing. And a lot of people walk around thinking that life is some kind of a fluke, that it wasn't ever supposed to happen, and it's just kind of a thing that happened on this rock, and then end of story. Well, I think that we find this, even with this electromagnetic energy just permeating the entire universe, that life is sort of more fundamental to this, and more than life, consciousness is more fundamental than that. And that gets into an idea called biocentrism, which is widely popularized by a guy named Dr. Robert Lanza. I believe his name is Lanza. It'd be terrible to mess up his name. Robert Lanza. Biocentrism. Come on, Google. Yes, I was right. Dr. Robert Lanza. And he basically says that all of the answers that physics is looking for, and that chemistry is looking for, and that biology is looking for, neurology, none of it, even quantum physics, none of it is going to make sense until we add consciousness to the equation and realize that the whole universe is alive in itself. And what we do as human beings, what we're doing with our brains, is that we're not just these organisms with all of our thoughts built up here, is that we're actually receiving this data, this consciousness through us, and it depends on how open our minds are to this incoming flux of signal that's everywhere. that determines what thoughts we have, what moods we have, what kinds of interactions we're having with people, and you know, if we're walking around all day with our brains so locked in and so shut off from this thing, we're gonna feel so alone and so tiny and so insignificant. But when you can step back and practice like a muscle, like keeping that mind space open and feeling like all of this energy is really pouring through you, you know, you become more connected and I think more in sync with what the universe is really trying to get done here. You know, you look at your molecules and your atoms and your cells and all of this tiny, tiny stuff that's working together to create you. You know, why does it have to stop once you get down to the atom? All of that system that's going into making human thoughts and a human emotion, why doesn't it go deeper? You know, below the atomic level, into the subatomic level, into the electrons and the photons that are carrying these kinds of radio frequencies. You know, does that life really permeate that deep into the universe? And I would posit that it does. And I think that the best evidence we have of this is the fact that there is this this electro life everywhere in the universe. So I think that's the point that I really wanted to get across today. We're going to hope that some of that actually made sense. And, you know, never forget that space really isn't silent. And if you believe that, you might be closing off yourself from a huge amount of potential. And if you sit back and think about it a little more deeply, you might realize that you're missing out on something huge. And once we can all admit that, and once science can admit that consciousness isn't something that's just generated by every single human on the planet by a freak accident, that it is something more fundamental, you know, I think that's going to be the thought and the type of thinking that really wakes us up and brings us together and gets us around all of these socioeconomic issues and climate change and all of this stuff that we just can't seem to figure out, because the danger is that we're going to obliterate ourselves off this planet before we ever even get a chance to reach that level. And I hope that doing this podcast and doing this YouTube channel and having this Instagram feed is going to help, because there are a lot of artists out there right now who are trying to do this. There are a lot of scientists out there that are trying to get this point across. And, you know, I hope that what we're doing here is just helping to lead people down the path of understanding that we are more connected than we realize. Anyway, this has been Will with Nebula Noises. Thanks for checking it out. Definitely follow me on Instagram, Nebula Noises. Follow me right here on YouTube. And I hope that there's a lot more content to come soon.